Yeah, you just brought to life, the power and the commitment that is generated through just thinking about management and work in a completely different way. So thank you for doing that. And for our last panelist, the challenge will be to maybe keep it a little short, given that we're tight on time and we want to have a few questions from the audience. But John, maybe you can just tell us a little bit about your journey at Zappos, at sort of busting bureaucracy, first through holacracy, and then from the new kind of steps you've taken around harnessing market-based dynamics, and sort of what have you learned, and what lessons might there be for others who are interested in undertaking a similar kind of journey?
Yeah, definitely. Thanks for having me, Michele. I won't spend too much time on beating in why we're doing this. I will just share, I think for us, the genesis of this was realizing that as Zappos grew from a small organization to an organization of 1,500 people, we lost our agility. And when we looked at other systems, one that particularly inspired us was cities, we found that productivity per resident actually goes up as city size goes up. But the exact opposite thing happens to most companies. As most companies grow, productivity per employee goes down. And so for me, if you want the simplest story to tell somebody to convince people that this is important, that's the one for me. So I won't spend too much time on the why. I think we've gotten a lot of that today. I did just want to talk a little bit about our journey and maybe some lessons that we learned along the way. As William spoke about earlier, decision rights are very important. If you're going to try to move fast, you need to understand who has the ability to make what decisions. For us, we realized that we needed an agile, evolutionary approach to decision rights. And for us, when we looked around, the best system that we could find for that was holacracy. For those that are not aware, it's a self-organizing system of governance. But as we implemented that, we also realized that this wasn't really getting us to the a true organization that operated like a city, which was our mental model that we wanted to try to go after. For instance, in holacracy, there's a hierarchy of circles. So it breaks down the hierarchy of people, but what is left is a hierarchy of circles and of work. And what we realized is that hierarchy of work still was having some of the same challenges that the hierarchy of people was. And that's what led us into thinking about our organization as what we call a market-based dynamics organization, which is really similar in many ways to what Hire is doing. We think of each circle as a micro enterprise, a micro business, a small startup on their own. To give you some sense of scale, at Zappos today, we have about 400 circles. So we have 1,500 employees. About 400 circles. Each person holds about 7 roles in the organization on average, and each person belongs to 3 circles on average. That means that each person is a member of 3 separate micro enterprises within the organization, which I think is a bit of a different model than other organizations that I've heard of. I think it has pros and cons, but it's breaking down that micro enterprise to even a more minute level. So that's where we're at. I wanted to share just a few insights about our journey. One thing as I reflected on it, and really this concept of building zero distance organizations or going towards that, I wanted to reflect that it's not just difficult for middle managers. Obviously, it is difficult for middle managers because this is a reimagining of the organization in a way that challenges the work that they do within the organization. But it's also challenging for people who are now expected to be the customer advocate, who are now given more authority and more ability and more agency, but they maybe have not done that before. They don't necessarily have the skills. So it's really important that we invest time into education, training, and support over the company's journey towards these types of organizations. So that's one reflection I had. The other reflection that I had, which I've kind of heard in the other panelists' speeches, is that we can't lose sight of, that we can't get so focused on building up micro enterprises that we lose sight of other important things to the organization. Things like mission, core values, brand alignment. For us at Zappos, we created something that we call the triangle of accountability. And what the triangle of accountability is a simple set of rules that help to show people what should we be doing in our micro enterprises and what shouldn't we be doing in our micro enterprises. And triangles have three sides. So our three sides are: one, balance your P&L. In other words, you have to be making more money or at least breaking even based on the money that you have coming in from your customers, either internal to the organization or external to the organization. So that's one side of the triangle. The second side is the core values. Even if you could make money, but what you're doing is not aligned with our company's core values, you shouldn't be doing it. And the third side is brand alignment. For us at Zappos, we've been built on wowing our customers. So any business needs to operate under the idea that whatever they do needs to truly wow their customers. And you might say, doesn't every business want to wow their customers? Well, there are some businesses that seek to build affinity with their brand by cutting costs, for instance, but not necessarily going above and beyond for their customers. So if you wanted to build a business like that, that wouldn't really be aligned with our brand, and therefore you shouldn't do it. So having something like that helps guide people through their micro enterprise journey within the organization, I think is really, really important. And the last reflection that I have about micro enterprises is, I talked a bit before about how each person on average is in 3 micro enterprises in Zappos, and how we have a lot of these micro enterprises. One thing that I think we'll see over time is as the transaction cost between these micro enterprises goes down, which is aided by technology, the right size for how big a micro enterprise could or should be will also go down. So those two things I think are correlated. And at Zappos, we work towards reducing that transaction cost by building an internal platform called the CFO tool, which helps to govern the contracts between micro enterprises within the organization and actually contracts with entities outside the organization. But I think it's important that we continue to work on technology, both social and technological, that help to reduce the transaction cost and really get fast feedback loops between customers and the people who are serving those customers. So thanks for your time. Thanks for having me on the panel.
Oh, thank you, John. That was really inspiring and very practical. And I love your last observation about technology enabling fundamentally new ways of organizing. It also, if we don't take some of these values seriously, could end up being, the agent of digital Taylorism, right? So it could go the other way. It's kind of up to us to shape it in a way that liberates people as opposed to increases control. We're almost out of time, and I want to be respectful. I don't want to be the person that creates a big delay here. But we've gotten a lot of really good questions from the audience, and I'd like maybe our panelists to take a couple, and maybe I'll have the first one to William and Kevin. And if you could limit your answers to like snippy 1 minute, 2 minute segments, that'd be great. And really the question comes, is really about the barriers. So, given the big dividend that comes from removing bureaucracy, right, and embracing zero distance principles and practices, why do you think that, Hire and Zappos and others, remain a minority? Like what really stands in the way? And maybe William, you go first, and then Kevin.
Yeah, so it's to this point that we're entering a world that did not exist 20, 30 years ago. Things are moving faster. We have to learn. And I think the biggest challenge is that people who were successful before in organizations over some period of time, they have to open up to unlearn. If that's not there, we're stopped, because the confirmation biases of what we think works as success are going to work against us. And I think this is the notion of we now have to unlearn and relearn what are the appropriate things to do and so forth. And the system, to all the points that were made by John and others, they work. but you have to understand the basic nature of what's going on there. And for many executives, this is a challenge. It's a barrier of being open to learning again. That's my opinion.
Yeah, and I just echo that. I think this whole thing is about change, and people don't like change, and especially people that have been successful. Most executives had a successful career. That success, they think, is what's led them there, but it's not going to get them forward. So being able to unlearn all these practices, these things that actually benefited you and got you ahead, it's a very difficult thing. And having faith that a different way might be better. So I think a big responsibility for organization is, how do you instill change? And how do you make people, as William said, want to learn and want to do something new and different?
Okay, great. Thank you for those responses. And then maybe one last question for Dana, for Donna. So forgive me, Donna, and John. So Donna, if a CEO of an organization came to you and said, "Oh, I love your quantum management model and thinking," and to you, John, they said, "I love what you guys did in terms of creating these micro enterprises and getting really close to the customer," what would be, and they say to you, "Well, we love all that, but we don't really know how to get going, how to start in this and embrace these kinds of ideas and practices." What would be your advice? Where would you want them to focus first?
Well,
maybe Dana, you go first.
I'll answer first, because for years I did lecture on quantum management and companies did ask me that, and I didn't know what to say. But once I discovered what Hire was doing and met Mr. Zhang and talked to him about Rendon Yoi, now when I lecture about quantum management and they say, "How do we do it?" I talk about Rendon Yoi and Hire, outline the basic principles of Rendon Yoi, tell them you can implement some or all of them. Maybe all of them don't suit your company. And if they want further information, get in touch with Hire.
Yeah, and for me, the answer would be, there's always a small step that you can take. And when I think about that, even without a lot of the practices around creating contracts and actually having the budgets and the money move based on the customer flows, if you asked a lot of people in many organizations today, who is your customer, they would not be able to give you a clear and concise answer. I've done this. And so a small practical step would be to work with people on identifying who their customers are, either internal or external, and what do those customers want from them, and maybe what is new chains of value or new ways that they can add value to existing customers, and what are ways that they might be able to please and service new customers. So even if you don't have the underlying systems that truly bake in the decision rights or give the budget to the people who are closest to the customers, I still think that there's a lot of work that can be done to help open people's eyes to thinking about becoming more of a zero distanced organization.
All right. Well, wonderful. Thank you. Thank you to all the panelists. I wish we could go on for another 30 minutes, and judging from the engagement from the audience, I think there would be a lot of people would be up for that, but we got to be respectful of time.